Imagine this, a comedian standing on stage making people laugh. The same man just a few years later is standing in front of the world's most powerful leaders, not as an entertainer, but as the president of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky's story is unlike any other. He wasn't born into politics. He wasn't a general or a career diplomat. He was an actor, a voice artist, a man who once played the role of a president on television, until destiny turned that role into reality. When war came knocking at Ukraine's door, many expected him to flee. Instead, he stood firm, declaring, "I need ammunition, not a ride." In that moment, he became more than a politician. He became a symbol of courage, resistance, and hope for millions across the world. But who really is Volodymyr Zelensky? How did he rise from the comedy stage to the battlefield of world politics? This is the untold story of Ukraine's unlikely president and how he changed history forever. Volodymyr Zelensky's journey embodies one of the most powerful contrasts in modern history, a transformation from entertainer to statesman. Born in Kryvyi Rih, Ukraine, in 1978, he trained as a lawyer but found his calling in entertainment, co-founding the comedy troupe Kvartal 95, competing in and winning Dancing with the Stars Ukraine, starring in films, performing stand-up, and even providing the Ukrainian voice for Paddington Bear. His popularity soared with the hit satirical TV show Servant of the People, 2015 to 2019, where he played a humble teacher who unexpectedly becomes president after a viral anti-corruption rant. The show resonated deeply with Ukrainians frustrated by political elites, and its success blurred the line between fiction and reality. In 2019, Zelensky entered real politics under a party named after the show, and in a historic landslide, he won over 73% of the national vote, defeating incumbent Petro Poroshenko. This extraordinary leap, from comedy stages and TV screens to campaign rallies and presidential palaces, captivated global media and created a narrative of life imitating art. The contrast of a comedian suddenly becoming commander-in-chief became symbolic. His acting and performance background provided skills in communication, timing, relatability, and emotional connection that few traditional politicians possessed. Internationally, this irony made headlines and shaped him into a global phenomenon, with audiences fascinated by how a man once known for jokes and satire transformed into a serious leader navigating Ukraine through crisis and war. This dual identity, entertainer turned president, remains one of the defining contrasts of his career and one of the most compelling stories of leadership in the 21st century. Volodymyr Zelensky's presidency was forever transformed in February 2022, when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, an event that thrust a former comedian into the heart of a historic crisis and redefined his leadership on the global stage. Facing imminent attack, Western allies reportedly urged him to evacuate Kyiv for safety, but he refused, defiantly posting on social media, "We are all here. We're in Kyiv. We defend Ukraine," a moment that echoed worldwide and solidified him as a symbol of resistance. Instead of abandoning his people, he countered offers of evacuation with one of the most iconic lines of the war, "I need ammunition, not a ride," signaling his unwavering resolve. As Russian forces bombarded Kyiv and advanced across Ukraine's borders, Zelensky stood his ground, wearing olive green attire and rallying citizens and soldiers alike with direct, emotional appeals for international military aid and sanctions against Moscow. His speeches to the U.S. Congress and European councils emphasized that this conflict was not only a battle for Ukraine, but a fight for democracy, a message that significantly influenced Europe's response and solidarity with Ukraine. As atrocities emerged, such as the Bucha massacre revealed after Russian withdrawal, Zelensky traveled to the devastated town to demand accountability and spotlight the brutal realities of war, turning global attention toward Ukraine's plight. Meanwhile, he personally connected with citizens through low-production selfie updates and video addresses from Kyiv, bolstering morale and fostering a sense of unity and authenticity unlike any traditional political communication. His perseverance under fire, leadership ethics, and transparent communication style swept him to international recognition, affirmed by titles such as Time Person of the Year, and by drawing foreign aid and military support that became essential to Ukraine's counteroffensive victories, including the liberation of Kherson and reprisals against Russian occupation, Encyclopedia Britannica. In that crucible of war, Zelensky emerged not merely as a head of state, but as the very embodiment of national defiance. His choice to stand, to fight, and to lead defined his presidency and rallied a nation against seemingly insurmountable odds. Volodymyr Zelensky's political debut was a spectacle few saw coming, a comedian turned secretary of satire stepping into the shoes of a real public servant. In 2018, his entertainment company, Kvartal 95, officially registered a political party named Servant of the People, echoing his hit satirical series in which he played a history teacher who becomes Ukraine's president after condemning state corruption. This move wasn't immediately declared as a power play. Zelensky himself insisted the registration was simply to prevent political appropriation, but speculation swirled that he was preparing for a campaign. Then came December 31st, 2018, a moment that stunned the nation. Zelensky announced his candidacy during a New Year's Eve TV show on the 1+1 channel, overshadowing incumbent Petro. His strategy was unlike any Ukrainian politician's. He bypassed policy-heavy speeches and press conferences, advocating instead through short comedic clips and social media content, leveraging platforms like YouTube and Instagram to convey anti-corruption messages in a relatable tone. From the outset, Zelensky's campaign resonated deeply with a populace disillusioned by endemic corruption, oligarchic rule, and political paralysis. He positioned himself as an outsider, a figure of authenticity amid seasoned elites, calling for transparency, moral leadership, and generational renewal. Within months, he surged into pole position, securing 30.2% in the first round of voting against Poroshenko's 15.9%. The campaign culminated in a dramatic showdown at Kyiv's Olympic Stadium in April 2019, full of theatrical debate energy, where Zelensky captivated tens of thousands before winning the presidency with a historic 73% of the vote in the runoff. Almost immediately after his inauguration on May 20th of 2019, Zelensky reshaped Ukraine's political landscape, dissolving parliament and calling early elections for July 21st. His party, largely composed of fresh faces with little to no political experience, won an overwhelming majority, capturing over 43% of the vote, including 254 seats in the Verkhovna Rada, Ukraine's first ever outright parliamentary majority under a newly elected president. This sweeping victory embodied the electorate's thirst for radical change. Ukrainians responded to Zelensky's promise of a clean break from Moscow-influenced oligarchs and political stagnation. Zelensky's rise, propelled by his media presence, outsider image, and the fiction-turned-reality narrative, was unprecedented. Analysts describe it as a manifestation of virtual incumbency, where his screen persona gave him a credibility advantage over his political rivals. Backed by media assets, particularly the 1+1 network connected to oligarch Ihor Kolomoisky, the campaign sparked intense political debate, though Zelensky distanced himself from the idea that he was merely a puppet of established interests. When Volodymyr Zelensky assumed office in May 2019, after a landslide 73% victory, widespread public optimism accompanied him, especially with victory in hand, control over parliament, and a bold mandate for change. He immediately launched a sweeping reform agenda, signing or initiating dozens of reform bills aimed at abolishing parliamentary immunity, decentralizing governance, and streamlining bureaucracy, all moves designed to dismantle oligarchic power and root out corruption in Ukraine's aging. In March 2020, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, Zelensky rolled out the Great Construction Program, an infrastructure initiative aimed at modernizing roads, schools, and hospitals that also generated hundreds of thousands of jobs, though critics derided it as misused public funds. Parallel to domestic reforms, Zelensky prioritized peace. In December 2019, he engaged in Normandy format talks and a prisoner exchange, showing early diplomatic engagement toward resolving the Donbas conflict. However, the Minsk process stagnated soon after the Paris summit. While his campaign promises had emphasized peace in Donbass, anti-corruption efforts in economic improvement, by 2020 to 2021, his approval ratings had slipped, dropping from levels above 70% to under 40%. Prompted by unmet expectations, the pandemic, economic challenges, and the sense that entrenched interests still held sway. His government faced fierce pushback on anti-corruption agendas, with the Constitutional Court overturning key reforms, triggering a political crisis that Zelensky sought to resolve by proposing to dismiss the entire court, though lawmakers pushed back. Meanwhile, peace efforts were undermined by both internal protest and external pressure. Nationalist groups and war veterans protested Zelensky's proposed implementation of the Steinmeier formula, viewing it as capitulation to Russia. Despite these challenges, Zelensky kept pursuing European integration and sought to align Ukraine with democratic institutions, while negotiating carefully for territorial integrity and sovereignty in the face of continued Russian pressure. Bundesakademie für Gesundheitswesen by early 2022, as Russia massed its forces and threats intensified, Zelensky appeared seasoned, even though he was unprepared for the magnitude of the crisis to come. His presidency, while marked by earnest reform intentions and an actual infrastructure drive, great construction, was also defined by political pushback, legal entanglements, and stalled peace. In this critical pre-war period, Zelensky proved himself a leader shaped by ambition, constrained by reality, but steadily preparing for what would become his greatest challenge. Everything changed on February 24th, 2022, when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, an event that catapulted President Volodymyr Zelensky from political reformer into a global symbol of resistance. Despite intelligence warnings and pleas from allies, Zelensky defiantly refused evacuation. Instead, he recorded a powerful video on the streets of Kyiv declaring, "We are all here. We defend Ukraine." A defiant message that captivated the world and mobilized his nation's defense. His leadership became immediately iconic, drawing comparisons to Winston Churchill, and helped secure massive military and financial support from the West. Analysts noted that Ukraine reached a strategic turning point that shifted global momentum. Meanwhile, battlefield events fueled hope. Ukrainian forces mounted staunch resistance, notably halting the advance on Kyiv and later achieving a stunning counteroffensive by liberating Kherson, moves that proved Ukraine could not only defend, but reclaim lost territory. At the same time, wartime horrors like the discovery of atrocities in Bucha logically extinguished initial hopes for a quick peace. Zelensky personally visited the site and demanded global accountability, reinforcing the moral clarity of Ukraine's struggle and the brutality of the Russian attack. His combination of emotional appeals, authenticity via social media, and solidarity with citizens elevated international support and shaped him into the face of democratic resistance. In the wake of the invasion, NATO unity strengthened, Europe reconsidered its energy and defense posture, and Zelensky stood at the center of a global response that defined the post-Cold War order of Europe. Since Russia's invasion in early 2022, President Volodymyr Zelensky has risen from national leader to an emblematic figure of global democracy, resilience, and principled defiance. His unfiltered authenticity, rejecting formal podiums, appearing in khaki shirts, delivering heartfelt messages via selfie videos from Kiev, redefined wartime leadership for a new era. In an unprecedented experiment of digital era statesmanship, he tapped into emotional storytelling, often honoring tragedies like 9/11 or the late Queen Elizabeth II, not as headlines but as threads of shared humanity to connect with Western audiences' frontiers. This laid the foundation for what Time editors deemed the most clear-cut person of the year in memory. Zelensky in the spirit of Ukraine, not just for surviving the crisis, but for rallying the world behind democratic values. Beyond Time's seal, he accumulated international state awards, the Legion of Honor, France, Charlemagne Prize, your EU, Sir Winston Churchill Leadership Award, Ronald Reagan Freedom Award, John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award, and the Atlantic Council's Global Citizen Award, all recognizing leadership rooted in moral conviction and democratic resistance. Zelensky's oratory earned him standing ovations across global institutions, from the U.S. Congress and European parliaments to viral public diplomacy via tailored references, Pearl Harbor for U.S., Churchill for UK, Berlin Wall for Germany. A strategy praised for galvanizing the world in a way we haven't seen in decades. This blend of emotional appeal and ethical argumentation turned him into a communicator-in-chief, driving Ukraine's wartime narrative forward with clarity and urgency. Analysts credit him with reframing the geopolitical narrative, prompting NATO unity, Western military aid, energy reforms, and citizen-led support worldwide. His leadership style, where vulnerability meets conviction, where empathy powers strategy, is now studied as a blueprint of modern crisis management. Volodymyr Zelensky, despite being celebrated as a global symbol of courage and democracy, has not been free from challenges and criticism. Before the full-scale Russian invasion in 2022, critics in Ukraine and abroad questioned his background, arguing that a comedian with no prior political experience was unfit to lead a country at war. His promises of anti-corruption reforms were met with skepticism, as Ukraine's oligarch-controlled politics remained a major obstacle, and many felt that his presidency was marked by inexperience and indecisiveness. When the war began, Zelensky was widely praised for staying in Kiev and refusing to flee, but his leadership style also drew criticism. Some Western analysts argued that his constant demands for weapons, financial aid, and sanctions were too aggressive, sometimes straining diplomatic relationships. Russia and pro-Russian commentators dismissed him as a puppet of the West, while human rights groups pointed out that wartime restrictions, such as martial law and media control, limited civil freedoms inside Ukraine. His military strategies also came under fire, particularly during battles like Bakhmut, where critics questioned whether symbolic resistance was worth the heavy Ukrainian casualties. Others accused him of underestimating the threat of a full invasion in the weeks before February 24th, 2022, despite U.S. intelligence warnings. Domestically, Zelensky faced challenges in maintaining unity. Corruption scandals within the defense ministry in 2023 damaged his reputation as a reformer, while economic struggles, displaced civilians, and political opposition made governance increasingly difficult. On the global stage, Zelensky's relentless lobbying for support kept Ukraine at the forefront of international politics, but it also sparked donor fatigue. Some nations in the global south criticized him for focusing too heavily on Western allies, and as the war dragged on, questions arose about whether global unity could be sustained. These challenges and criticisms reveal that while Zelensky is admired as a heroic leader, his presidency is also marked by political risks, complex controversies, and the reality that no leader, no matter how inspirational, is without flaws. Volodymyr Zelensky's legacy is already one of the most remarkable in modern political history. Rising from the world of entertainment as a comedian and actor, he transformed into a wartime leader whose courage and resilience became a global symbol of democratic resistance. His decision to remain in Kyiv during the full-scale Russian invasion of 2022 will likely be remembered as the defining moment of his presidency, inspiring not only his people, but also democratic nations worldwide. Zelensky's legacy is tied to his ability to unite Ukrainians under a common national identity, to reshape global perceptions of Ukraine, and to secure unprecedented levels of international support, from financial aid to military assistance. However, his story is also complex. Critics argue that his government has struggled with corruption, wartime restrictions on freedoms, and controversial military decisions. This means his historical legacy may be debated for decades. Was he the heroic defender of democracy, or a leader whose symbolic actions sometimes came at heavy costs? Looking ahead, Zelensky's future and Ukraine's destiny remain deeply interconnected. If Ukraine secures victory and regains its territories, his role in rebuilding the nation will define his second chapter as a statesman. His leadership will be tested in reconstructing war-torn cities, reviving the economy, strengthening democratic institutions, and guiding Ukraine toward European Union and NATO membership. Even if he chooses to step down after the war, Zelensky's influence will not fade. He is likely to remain a powerful global voice for freedom and human rights. The ultimate question of his future lies in whether he can turn Ukraine's wartime sacrifices into a foundation for long-term peace, stability, and prosperity. Either way, Zelensky's name is already etched into history, not just as Ukraine's president, but as a global leader whose fight became a symbol of democracy's survival in the 21st century. Volodymyr Zelensky's story is far from over. History will remember him not only as Ukraine's president during its darkest hour, but as a man who stood when many expected him to fall. His true legacy, that will be decided by the battles yet to come and the future his people will build. What do you think Zelensky's place in history will be? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of the world's leaders.